how to act and behave when we receive mistreatment. What do I do? Isn't that a nice question in general for a good life-related question that anybody could ask? What about when I'm mistreated? What do I do? What am I supposed to do? And we could probably hear all kinds of different answers to that about what a person should do in the face of mistreatment. And some in the world would teach this or that or the other thing. It's really one of them. If you think that the section we just discussed in our Bible class is controversial, I don't know if it's as controversial as this section, these next few verses, or further on down in Matthew chapter 5, about turning the other cheek in that section. One of the most controversial. How should a person respond to mistreatment? A man might teach his son, you need to give it right back. Somebody does something to you, you do it right back. That's what you should do. Don't ever back down from a fight or something like that because of whatever reason. I don't know what the number of reasons might be, but that is discouraged. Don't ever do that. Don't ever run away. But even if you get beat up, you just try to give as good as you got. And so many other things. If somebody hurts you or betrays you or does this or that to you, you go and you do the exact same thing back to them. You get even, they might say. But what does Jesus say? Well, in these verses here, as we've been seeing in this part of the sermon, Jesus is going to explain to them and tell them what they've always heard. And again, it's going to be because it was what the law taught. But that there is a greater law coming. It's now here, but in his day it was coming. Where the principle, the moral standard, we might say, was going to be elevated, all a part of God's plan. I'll just read once again the text here, Matthew 5:38 through 42. And by the way, I misspoke already. It's not tonight we'll be repeating. It's going to be Wednesday when I'll be repeating this. There's a section in between here. He says, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, don't resist the one that is evil, the evil person. Whoever smites you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. If any man will go to the law with you, take your coat, let him have your cloak too. Whoever shall force you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks or who begs from you, and from him that would borrow from you, don't turn him away." So here's what they had been taught. First of all, they taught, according to the law, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. How many times have you heard that in your life? I don't know how many times you've heard it correctly or properly applied, but you've probably heard those words, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I think it's probably going to be used most of the time in our day to justify something that's just happened. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. If you do something to somebody and say, "What'd you do that for?" I said, "Remember that one time when you do that? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, So I was justified in what I just did." No, that's not what the law meant when it said it. In fact, what the Old Testament law had in mind was not so much allowing or justifying retaliation as much as limiting punishment. An eye for an eye. If you do something that causes somebody to lose their eye, you're not going to lose your life. You can't take their life because they took your eye. That's the point. That's the point of that. An eye is for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Punishment matches the deed, the crime. That's really what the point of that Old Testament law was. But nevertheless, you could flip that around and look at that as justification. Somebody might, and they seem to have done that. Used it as justification for how I respond when somebody does something to me. Somebody hurts me, I'm going to hurt them. But what Jesus taught was so far above that, so much greater. Something that the world needs to listen to, something that the world in many instances and times cannot comprehend. And many Christians cannot even comprehend, which is why what Jesus says in these verses is so controversial, because we almost can't even believe our ears or our eyes. Is Jesus really saying this? To do this? So what does he say? Well, he has a rule. Starts off by saying, don't resist an evil person. But most of these things that Jesus says here, we have to qualify them. We're not going to lessen them or weaken them, but we have to qualify them. Don't resist an evil person. Well, Jesus himself resisted evil people sometimes. But not in the way that he's talking about here, obviously. He resisted the devil, and the devil is an evil person. There's no doubt about it. He's not an evil human being, but he's an evil person. He's an evil entity, an evil personality. He certainly resisted the hypocritical scribes and Pharisees on many occasions. He resisted, for the majority of his ministry, he resisted the people trying to kill him. But that's not what he means here. He's not talking about never resisting an evil person no matter what they're doing or in what way they're evil. But we have to qualify what Jesus is saying here. First of all, we have to understand he's not talking to parents with their children. If your children do something evil, Jesus is not saying to ignore that and do nothing about it. That's not what he means. It's not anything to do with what he's talking about. He's not talking about the civil government either. He's not even talking about congregations resisting evil people. He gave explicit instruction later on in his ministry of how the church is to respond to a brother or a sister who is wayward and who refuses to repent, who is in sin and won't repent. Jesus certainly did not encourage them to ignore that and don't resist them, but the exact opposite, in fact, to resist them, to put them out and help them to return, see the need to return to God. He was speaking to individual disciples, and that's the point. Me as an individual, you as an individual. What would he tell me to do when I am mistreated? How should I react? We know how the world would react. What does Jesus say to do? He gives 4 examples of what to do when you're mistreated. We're going to look at these hopefully briefly, although so much could be said, and I'll try to save most of it for whenever we dive a little bit deeper in our study of the life of Christ. He says, first of all, turn the other cheek. That's the abbreviated version. But the full version is this, and I'll paraphrase it. He said, if somebody slaps you in the face on the right cheek or the left cheek, whichever one, then here's what you do. You don't slap them on the cheek. You let them slap your other cheek. And can you believe that? That the Lord, that's the advice he would give? Somebody slaps you in the face, and the implication is you didn't do anything to deserve it by anybody's standard. You did nothing. You're walking down the street, and somebody randomly comes up to you, slaps you right in the face. What do? Jesus says, here's what you do. Give them the other one. Say, oh wait, you forgot one. I think a slap in the face has pretty much universally been understood to be an insult. Whether it hurts or not, the pain of it is irrelevant. It's just the gesture of doing it. And it's been suggested that the right versus left may have an indication of a backhanded slap as being what Jesus may be primarily thinking of here, which I guess has its own connotations. And the idea is obviously that it's an insult. It's not necessarily that it hurts. Depending on who does it or how hard they do it, it's going to hurt physically. But it might be that it hurts emotionally or mentally even more. It's embarrassing, maybe humiliating. It's an insult. Somebody does it as an insult. But something we need to understand, first of all, about this whole principle is that even the hardest of slaps, you ever seen anybody do these slapping competitions, try to knock each other out? Don't look, it's kind of hard to watch, but we're not talking about that. We'll leave that aside. Somebody just slaps you normally, the normal way to slap somebody in the face, I guess. I wouldn't know. It may hurt, But it's not life-threatening. You wouldn't think. They do it with their bare hand. Jesus is not necessarily talking here about life-threatening danger, which is a false assumption that leads to many people's confusion. You mean if somebody comes to me and points a gun at me or whatever, pulls a knife on me, that I'm supposed to just, hey, here I am, my heart I think feels like it's right here. Here you go. Let me help you out. No. He said if somebody slaps you on the cheek. He's not talking about life-threatening danger. But even so, some people might at this point start to really question and criticize Christianity as being all sorts of negative things. Clueless, unable to relate to the real world. They just let people, if you want to be a Christian, you got to let people push you around. You got to let people take advantage of you in even the most extreme matters. Well, the Bible does have some to say about the concept of allowing yourself to be taken advantage of as opposed to certain alternatives. But Jesus here is not talking about an across-the-board just going around to everybody, letting them do whatever they want to you. He's talking about a principle. And that principle goes against the philosophy of the world. There's been a sort of a general rule throughout time, maybe, that a gentleman must protect his honor at all costs. And if somebody walks up to you and slaps you in the face as an insult, maybe not so much today, but maybe back in older times, you have to answer that. You have to respond. In fact, in some instances, in some cultures, that would have been an invitation to fight to the death. Slapping them in the face, maybe with the glove. Take off the glove, slap them in the face. That's a challenge. And if you don't respond to that challenge by fighting that man to the death, you've just forfeited your honor. And that's what a man needs, is honor. First of all, we got a skewed definition of honor. Because killing a man because he slapped you with a glove is not honor in my book. The greater honor would be ignoring it. But Jesus even goes beyond ignoring it intentionally. And just the very concept of offering your other cheek to that person. Can you put yourself in this literal position? You're actually in this position where somebody does that and you literally tell them to slap your other cheek. How do you think they would react to that? Most of them, I would dare say, would be in shock. First of all, they're going to think you're a psychopath. That other blow might not ever be landed because they're probably already taken off. But the point is the different factor. That's not what a person would normally do. And the real point and principle here is part of self-denial. This is what Jesus focused on and emphasized so much. All these things, all four of these are different ways of communicating these various aspects of self-denial, not being self-involved, not putting yourself first. So instead of being offended and thinking, I got to respond to this, and if they did it to me, how dare this man do that to me or woman, and I'm going to give it right back. I got my reputation to uphold here. I'm not going to just be slapped around. I'm going to beat them half to death. And nobody will ever slap me again. That's one way to do it. Or you could do it the Jesus way. It's not about you. It's about God. It's about good. And it's about right. That's what Jesus recommended doing. Think about Jesus himself. He had times in his life when he let people take advantage of him. And in his instance, it was a life-threatening thing. We have to understand, of course, that was the purpose of his coming to the earth in the first place, ultimately. It was supposed to happen. That's why he let that happen. He doesn't necessarily encourage every Christian to let it happen. But that's not the point. But yet he did give us an example of suffering and not retaliating. Don't retaliate. Spit in his face. Many of them did. slapped him in the face, hit him, put a crown of thorns on his head, all these things. And yet he did not lift a finger. He didn't even say a word except for, if I said something wrong, will you just tell me I said something wrong? But if I didn't say anything wrong, then will you tell me why you hit me? That's all. That's it. That's the extent of his retaliation. The most calm and gentle, reasonable response. Otherwise, he didn't do anything. And as we sing many times, he could have called 10,000 angels. That's what the song says. 12 legions of angels, I think is what the text actually says. Turn the other cheek. But he didn't stop there. He also said in the next verse, if somebody sues you, again I'll paraphrase, sues you for your shirt, go ahead and give him your coat too. What? Somebody sues you, let's say for $1 million. What kind of lawyer? Well, they won. You got to pay them $1 million. Why don't you go ahead and give them $2 million? That lawyer will be out of practice real quick if that's his advice. But that is very similar to what Jesus is suggesting here. Somebody sues you for your garment, undergarment, overgarment. The point is a garment, I think is really the point. And they win is the implication, so you have to give that to them. Go ahead and give them another one. Why would he say this? Same thing, same principle. Being different, number one, or maybe number two. Number one would be not being all about yourself. Take yourself down a little bit. Don't be self-absorbed. Don't insist on your personal rights. But deny yourself. It's not the end of the world, somebody might say, if this happens. It's not the end of the world if you lose your coat too. But look at what good might be done from that. Somebody might really be moved by that. Or they might not. But whether they're moved or not is irrelevant. This is the principle that Jesus is talking about. It's easy to get lost in the details of some of these instructions, and that's whenever we get confused or we come up with these hypothetical scenarios that are more extreme than what the simple principle that Jesus is communicating about self-denial, thinking of others. Yes, a person might have no right whatsoever to have your coat, but what your right, what their right is, or what my rights are, is totally beside the point. Jesus says, they sue you and get your shirt or whatever, your tunic, your cloak, give them your coat too. Slap you in the face on your right cheek, let them slap the left cheek. He goes further than that, though. And by the way, as far as your personal rights are concerned, Jesus, again, is not condemning the concept of exercising your legal rights. Paul did that later on in Acts. He's about to be tried unjustly and possibly put to death, but he appealed, he voiced his right to appeal to Caesar because that was the right of a Roman citizen, and he was a Roman citizen by birth. And so he spared his own life. He did save himself by appealing to Caesar, at least potentially. And there was nothing wrong in him doing that. Paul was not sinless, but there was no wrong or any indication of wrongdoing there. That was simply, it was no different than times when Jesus avoided people to save his own life because it wasn't time. But as Paul himself said, if I've done something worthy of death, I'm not going to try to fight dying because I should die. He said elsewhere, but I haven't, is the thing. And ultimately, it was a last resort, but he finally appealed to Caesar. That is not a violation of the principle that Jesus is discussing here about the concept of not always insisting on your own personal rights. Here's one that's quoted very often. Go the second mile. Just in those exact words quoted. It's used as an expression. In one way, it's kind of neat that it's used as an expression because it would indicate that people at least get the gist of what Jesus taught here. You need to go the second mile. What Jesus really said was, if somebody forces you to go 1 mile, and we already have to have a backstory for that, because what does that even mean? Nobody's ever forced me to go a mile before. And how could they force me to go a mile? But Jesus says, if somebody forces you to go 1 mile, why don't you go ahead and go with them too? It's, again, the same exact thing as the other two. The principle is the same. Well, it's been said and pointed out that in that day, and I guess it was adopted by the Persians, like multiple things that the Romans practiced were adopted or picked up from the Persians, was a Roman soldier or a soldier could force somebody, a Jew in this instance, to carry his stuff up to 1 mile. Apparently that was the mark. You can't, one person, 1 mile. Then if there's another person there, grab him. Then you can go a mile. And if as long as there's somebody there, you could really get a nice break and just have to walk without carrying your stuff. So based on that practice, and you can imagine, you might be in a hurry. You might be running late somewhere to go somewhere. Your family might be waiting for you. No cell phones back then. Can't shoot a text message, by the way, I'm having to walk a mile with this Roman soldier. Be back soon. But it didn't matter. If they called on you, and I guess they were in the mood, they could force you, literally, actually force you, or you would suffer the consequences. So imagine that's your day. You're supposed to be somewhere. You're expected somewhere. You're late. You're running behind. You're in a hurry, and now you're grabbed. And this Roman soldier, this gruff, intimidating soldier, forces you to do this. How do you think some of the people in that situation would react when they hit that mile marker? I have some ideas. Probably involves spitting. If they weren't afraid to lose a couple of teeth, maybe to their fist anyway. Throwing the stuff down. Making any variation of grunting noises to voice your disapproval, sighs and sounds. But imagine if you were a Roman soldier and you're used to seeing that kind of thing, and then this person carries your stuff 1 mile. They're not begrudging, might even chit-chat along the way if they'll let you. They might not even want to hear what you're saying, but you're cheerful, you're willing, and then you hit the mile marker and you keep going, and the guy stops and he's like, "What are you doing? That's it. We can't go any farther." He said, "No, I'm okay. Keep going." That might not change that man's life, but he's probably not going to forget it. Some good could come from that. And again, I don't even think that's what Jesus' point is. It's not about good that could come from it. That's just an added bonus. It's about you not being so about you. You are not the center of the universe. And right is more important than you. Good is more important than you. And in this case, not doing something that is wrong is better than anything else that might be resulted from any given thing. Willfully taking an insult to your honor, or doing something that the world considers to be dishonorable, like ignoring a slap to the face. You did something good, Jesus says. If you do that, ignore it, or like he says, let them slap you on the other side. The world might say, "Boy, this guy's pathetic. What a weakling, scaredy cat," you name it. Jesus says you showed yourself to be a real man if you did that. Avoiding doing something that's wrong is more important than your personal so-called honor. or reputation as whatever you might want the reputation of being, or whatever reputation you might want to have. It's an attitude that we're talking about. Jesus in this section, in this sermon, almost throughout, is about attitudes, hearts. It's a heart thing. Your heart. And being a peculiar people. He's trying to instill a certain kind of attitude. And that's what these examples are about. And finally, be unselfish in helping others. To use Jesus' exact words, he says, give to the person who asks something from you. If somebody asks you for something, give it to them. Now, talk about needing to qualify a statement. We can't take that and run with it. We're going to get ourselves in some dark territory. What if somebody asks you to put a bullet in their head? Well, Jesus said, hands are tied. I either got to kill him or disobey Jesus. No, not what Jesus is talking about. What if somebody asks you for some drugs? Or if you have a prescription medication that is rightly your prescription, and somebody asks you for some of them, even though they don't need it, they just want it because you can get a nice high off of it. Well, Jesus said, hey, if they ask, I got to give it to them. What if you did that for your children? We'd all be broke. Even more broke than we already are. And they would be spoiled little brats even more than they are. No offense. Well, the Baumgartners aren't here today, so take that back. Take offense. There's only 3 children here, so. Not talking about parents with children, again. But what if somebody is in need? And I have something, some way that I can help them, or I could think of some way to help them. And I just out of the hardness of my heart, strictly out of the hardness of my heart, not any other circumstances that might come into play, but just because I don't want to help them. I don't want to take the trouble. I don't want to take the time. I don't want to take the resources from my own pool and stock. Don't want to help. That's what Jesus is condemning here. If somebody asks you, give to them. Give to them. He doesn't say give money to them, by the way. He says give to them. And he doesn't imply that whatever they ask is the thing that you have to give to them. Because somebody might ask for something, but they might need more than that one thing. In fact, they may not even need that one thing. But you can still give to them. The idea is not turning people away just because you don't want to be bothered. Mentally or emotionally or physically or whatever it is. Goes back to selfishness. Or rather, unselfishness. Be unselfish. We got non-retaliation examples. We've got now giving to others. We might think, how do these go together, though? The first 3 are right there together, but this one, this is different. Well, no, not really, because it all goes back to the self. Denying of self, thinking of others, putting others in the forefront, not being self-centered. I can give to people in a way that is helpful to them. I personally, I'll just speak for myself, I don't give people money ever. Because I know that somebody who even needs money, they also need other things. If somebody's begging, I don't care. It doesn't matter if they're genuine or not. They might still be hungry. And so I'll go down to McDonald's or somewhere and get food. Jesus is not saying you have to give people money because they ask for money. You can give in other ways. But am I going to take the trouble and time to do that for them? How can I help this person? Sometimes giving them money is not going to help them. But if you just do what Jesus is saying, you don't have to worry about all that. Be helpful. Do it in a helpful way. Help others as you have opportunity. And we all have opportunity to help others. One of the most helpful things that a person could do if they're in such a blessed position of having their own business or something like that is giving somebody a job. It's one of the most helpful things you could ever do for somebody who's maybe struggling to find work and who therefore is needing to beg and ask from others. I could give you $20 or I could give you a job. I don't know if any of you are in that position, but for those who might be, that's something to think about. You talk about changing a person's life, helping them. Maybe there are complications in their records or their identification. Our system is so complicated at this point. They may be in a position where they think they don't know where to start to get a job because they don't have the required whatever. Help them. Let's work together. I'll help you to get there. So many ways we can help people other than simply throwing money at them. So don't ever think that the only way to give is by giving money. You can give other things: time, effort, food, etc. The bottom line in all this, don't be self-centered. You can tie all these together, all four of these. Don't be self-centered. That may be our initial reaction. Somebody slaps you in the face. I can't believe somebody would ever slap me in the face. He did that to me. I didn't care when he slapped that person, but now he slapped me. See? Me. It's about me. Unlimited retaliation might be the way of the world. The law of the jungle, you might say. The Old Testament law might be called limited retaliation, with the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But what Jesus taught here is unlimited goodwill to others. The law of love. And as much as we might struggle to comprehend exactly what he's saying here, it's much easier to understand than just simply to obey him, whatever he says. What's the principle here? Do that. I might not know exactly every little detail that he's alluding to, but just don't be self-centered. Don't be selfish. Don't be all about yourself. Put others' interests in front of your own, not just next to your own, but in front of your own. The reason this is important is not just because of the effect it'll have on them, but because that will change my whole outlook on life. If I will have this kind of attitude, if I will have this kind of spirit and heart in me, my life, everything I do in my life will be different. That's why Jesus encouraged it so strongly. So what about you? Are you self-centered? Do you put yourself first? If you put yourself before other people, chances are you're going to put yourself before the Lord too. It's just as simple as that, which is why the reverse is also true. If you put others before yourself, chances are you're also putting the Lord before yourself. And if you're putting the Lord before yourself, you will be putting others before yourself. So Jesus stresses in this section and other places as well, put yourself last. Always. Others first. Especially him.